I smoked or ingested pot every day for 20 years until the day I didn't. And even on that day, the day that I stopped, I didn't wake up that morning knowing that by the end of the day I'd be done. But I was, and I quit. Cold turkey for 2.5 years. In this video, I'm going to tell you why I made such an abrupt decision, why I then went back to pot 2.5 years later, why I quit again, and why this time I think it's permanent. Marijuana was my drug of choice. I know. Some of you are saying, but it's not a drug. Look, I'm not here to argue semantics. For me, it was a drug. I was addicted to it. But I didn't admit that or realize that until I was 35 years old. I used it habitually every day for 2 decades. And the entire time I was on team, not a drug. It's harmless. It's not addictive. You can't overdose on it. It's just a plant, etc., etc. It was the thing I looked forward to at the end of every day. It made me funnier. I had more fun when I was on it. I could think more critically. I could think more deeply. My conversations were more enriched. I was calmer. I was kinder. I could be more creative. It enhanced me in every single way. It was my best friend. Or so I thought. In summer 2019, I had a humbling epiphany. My wife and I, well, she was my fiance back then, we were hanging out with a friend of ours, and he lived about an hour away. And shortly before we got to his house, I realized that I'd left my THC oil back at home, and I was bummed. When we got inside, I expressed to both of them that I was disappointed that I didn't have my oil because I was looking forward to a fun evening. They asked me why I needed it, and I explained to them everything I just explained to you. I have more fun when I'm on weed. I'm funnier. I'm a better conversationalist. I think about things more deeply. I think more critically. Overall, I just enjoy my evenings more when I'm high. And they just kept probing. Why? Why? I think you can be funny without it. I think you're creative without it, etc., etc. And I just kept resisting. And in that moment, I felt myself getting defensive. And the more defensive I got, the more self-aware I became. And I realized, much to my own chagrin, that I had a dependency on pot. It's almost laughable to think about because obviously I had a dependency on it. I did it every day for 20 years, but it wasn't until that moment that it really hit home. I realized just what a crutch it was. And I started sobbing. I started crying. I had a cathartic moment. I was releasing emotionally and expressing to them how afraid I was of experiencing life without getting high. I had conditioned myself to think that I was incomplete without weed, that I was incapable of enjoying life without it, that I was dull, that I couldn't be creative, that I couldn't be funny, that I couldn't have fun without pot. And I wept and I wept. The writing had been on the wall for a long time, but I refused to accept it. In fact, in 2016, I participated in an ayahuasca ceremony. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with ayahuasca, it is primarily a purgative experience. You purge out negative thoughts, negative experiences, trauma. It's a cleansing process and experience. And my ceremony, I sweat profusely. That was my purge. It was excessive sweating. Not only excessive sweating, but sweating that smelled like marijuana, like pot smoke. And it reeked. Again, this is full transparency. I'm just giving you the real deal. This whole space, they call it a maloca, was filled with the smell of pot smoke, to the point where one of the shamans of the ceremony asked if someone was smoking weed during the ceremony. And I had to humbly admit, no one's smoking. It's me. It's coming from my body. It's coming through my pores. It's, at that point, whatever that was, 15 or 16 years worth of pot smoke that was living inside of my body, that was now excreting from my system. and it was gross, and everyone smelled it. You'd think that would be a wake-up call, but it wasn't. I wasn't ready to accept it. I did not want to say goodbye. I was in denial. I liked pot. I didn't see it as a problem. I saw that experience more as a funny story than as a sign that maybe it was time for me to move on. One of the big arguments against weed being a drug is that you can't overdose on it, which is a justifiable argument. And I pretty much agree with it because you can't die from smoking too much weed. But as a pot smoker of 20 years, you can experience high levels of anxiety and stress that are encouraged or exacerbated by smoking pot. The paranoid pot smoker is a stereotype for a reason. I experienced paranoia at times, not all the time. If it was all the time, I wouldn't do it. But at times, I experienced pretty extreme paranoia. Not only that, but the only times in my life that I've had what I would call an anxiety or a panic attack happened when I was stoned. Never sober have I experienced that, and never under the influence of any other substance have I experienced such levels of panic, paranoia, or anxiety. So for me, that's what overdosing on pot looks like. Furthermore, marijuana inhibited my ability to socialize. It made me wary of big groups and parties, and I would often stay home. That would be my choice. I'd rather stay home and get high than go network or meet people or hang out with large groups. Now, in some ways, that's a good thing because in my 20s, I definitely didn't get into the bad habit of going out and drinking excessively, but it also kept me from experiencing more experiences and meeting more people. Now, I could get high with a small group and be very comfortable. Usually if they were smoking too, but if you put me in a large crowd while I was high, forget about it. I would want to get out of there as fast as possible. And that's my entire 20s. The entire first part of my adulthood, I was somewhat afraid of people because I loved smoking pot so much. And that night with Sonia, who's my wife now, and our good friend Bill, was profound. And it was unexpected. But it was so humbling. It was a turning point in my life. I realized how much time I'd wasted thinking I needed something in order to be complete. And I needed to finally experience my life through a sober lens. I had to prove to myself that I was a good person, that I was kind, that I could be calm, that I could enjoy things, that I could still be funny, that I could still be patient, that I could still be creative without smoking or eating weed. So I quit cold turkey, and that was it. The next day was a new day, was a new chapter in my life, and it was not easy. So for people who say it's not addictive, if you're in the habit of doing something every day for 20 years and you stop, you're going to go through an adjustment period. I wanted to keep smoking. I wanted to keep having the experience of being high. I was kind of cranky. Those first few weeks were tough. Now, I can only imagine what it's like to quit something like heroin or, I don't know, something that's super duper addictive and that you go through heavy withdrawals from. But I did experience some level of withdrawal because I was so used to experiencing the evenings in particular stoned. I was uncomfortable. I was restless. I was a little more stressed out. I was edgier, but I was committed. And after a couple weeks, I adjusted. And the best news is I began to see and realize that I was still capable of being kind, calm, fun, funny, creative, a big thinker. I was able to do all these things and be these things without weed. And it was transformative. And it gave me a boost in self-confidence. So I was able to keep this going for 2.5 years. Now, I wish I could say that that was the day that I stopped, never looked back, and never went back to it. But that would be a lie. I'm human. and I slipped. After about 1,000 days, I gave in and had some pot. And it was because I was super stressed. That's not an excuse, but it was my excuse. I was super stressed for reasons that I won't go into, but if you want to know about that story, well, I'll put a video right here for you to watch, all about my rock bottom moment. But we experienced stress like I'd never felt before. And that had to do with relocating and buying a house and having a baby and getting pregnant with a surprise second baby and so on. And I thought I needed something to take the edge off, to scratch the itch. So I thought, you know what? It's been 2.5 years. I'm going to have just one little dot of my THC oil and be done. See what happens. I probably won't even like it. It's been so long. So I took one dot and it immediately relieved my stress. I felt so much more relaxed. And I was like, wow, this is great. I forgot how nice this feeling is. And then I committed to myself, well, I don't want to go back to doing it every night. In fact, I've proven to myself that I don't need it every night. So what if I just do it once a week? I was like, yeah, that works. I'll just do it once a week. I'll do it on the weekend. No big deal. But once a week became twice a week, and then twice a week became every day. Before I knew it, I was doing it every night again. So I picked it back up. And I did this for about 7 or 8 months. And then I quit again. And this is important because it may seem like since I already quit once and I relapsed and I went back, that why should you think that I'm done now? Well, because I didn't have to have the cathartic experience. I didn't have to have the epiphany, the humbling, crying, sobbing moment where I realized it was such a problem. I knew it was a problem. I knew I shouldn't be doing it the whole time I was doing it during those 6 or 7 months or 7 or 8 months, whatever I just said. That time span, I knew that I shouldn't be, that I didn't need it. And so then one morning, I really just woke up and thought, I'm done. And it felt final. And I haven't looked back since. And even the transition away from it, those first few weeks after quitting again, weren't as hard. It was actually pretty easy. I'd remind myself actually sometimes like, oh, you're not high right now. Great. I had patterned myself to be so familiar with the feeling of being sober that when I quit that second time, it was like I was just going right back to that without any sort of withdrawal or missing it, longing for it. And that was 6 months ago. And I can honestly say I don't think I'm ever going to go back because I enjoy who I am. I feel good about myself. I know that I'm capable of creating cool stuff and I can have fun and I can enjoy things and I can think deeply and I can be funny without the influence of marijuana. I coach men for a living. That's what I do. I've been doing it for a while now. And this may not come as a surprise, but most guys, most people in general, struggle with some sort of addiction, at least at some point in their lives. Most people have a vice or a bad habit or a crutch that they lean on to a certain extent, but it's pretty common. And a lot of them have asked me at some point in our working together, they say, I smoke pot. Do you think I should quit? And my answer is always the same. If you're asking me that question, you already know the answer. I was in denial. So I probably never would have asked that question in those 20 years that I was doing it. I wouldn't have asked some mentor or coach, hey, do you think I should stop smoking pot? Because I didn't want to know the answer. I didn't want to know what they would say. So I wouldn't tell them. I wouldn't even bring it up. I was so in denial that I wouldn't ask that question. But if you're even seeking someone else's opinion on your habit, that's probably a strong indicator that you should maybe keep an eye on that habit at the very least, or consider taking a pause, taking a break. You know, deep down, when something's a problem. You know the truth about yourself and what your needs are and what you use as an outlet, what's a vice, what's a bad habit. If you're honest with yourself, you already know the truth. If you smoke pot because you have some medical condition and it helps, I totally get it. If you smoke casually, no big deal, every now and then, time to time, I get that too. Even if you're smoking weed every day, I get that too. Only you know whether it's a problem and whether quitting would actually be a net positive gain for you in your life. There was this Cat Williams interview with Shannon Sharp on his podcast a few months ago. It was super viral. I'm sure some of you have seen it. He said a lot in that interview, but one of the things he said that I loved was anything that takes over your free will is the devil itself. That's how you know. If your free will is compromised because of a habit or a vice, then it's probably time to at least pause and reflect. The last thing I want to say is lots of people yearn to get back in touch with their inner child. Why? Because children love to play and know how to have fun. They're not riddled with worry. They are endlessly creative and they enjoy using their imaginations. And they don't get high. But they do sometimes headbutt you and give you a black eye. If you want to know why smart people make stupid decisions and why your IQ is absolutely meaningless, watch this video right here. I'll wait. Oh, and give me a thumbs up. Okay, now get out of here.